A few months ago, when it was announced that Kim Kardashian had worn a dress to the Met Gala that originally belonged to Marilyn Monroe, I didn't get my 2 cents in, as I feel like there had already been so many contributions to this controversy online. And I also just had other stuff going on and didn't really have time to put a video out. But with the recent news of Lizzo playing a 200-year-old crystal flute that belonged to a former American president, I figure I better get my 2 cents in, otherwise can I really call myself a museum YouTube channel? First off, I just want to make a blanket statement and say that I don't think rich people should be able to check artifacts out of museums like library books so that they can impress their stupid rich friends. That is the line in the sand that I draw, and I think it's also one of the things that kind of separate the Lizzo and Kim Kardashian controversies. To break this down a bit, as I mentioned, Kim Kardashian borrowed the Marilyn Monroe dress that Marilyn Monroe wore when she sang Happy Birthday to some American president, I don't remember. And Kim Kardashian borrowed this dress from Ripley's Believe It or Not, and she wore it to the Met Gala, and she wore it for about 5 minutes on her ascent up the iconic Met Gala stairs. And there was a lot of outrage online and also in the museum world after this happened for a number of different reasons. The first reason being that Marilyn Monroe and Kim Kardashian have two very different body types, and as a result, the dress didn't really fit properly. And secondly, it is like rule number 1 of textile collections and textile conservation. You do not wear items from the textile collection. When it comes to proper museum practice, some textile conservators opt to not wear gloves and instead go for very clean, thoroughly washed hands instead when handling these sorts of objects. And if a textile conservator or, a curator does decide to opt for not wearing gloves, they have to make sure that they're not wearing lotions or creams or anything like that on their hands, because then that can be transferred to the garment and potentially cause staining or damage. Now, I don't want to presume, but I imagine that when Kim Kardashian went to the Met Gala, she was probably not just wearing makeup on her face, but on other parts of her body as well, not to mention any lotions and creams, deodorant, perfume, and it is very likely that a lot of these were then transferred to the Marilyn Monroe dress. And this is, of course, on top of body sweat and the dress just not fitting properly. It has been hotly debated online whether or not the dress was damaged or not. There's lots of close-ups of photos, but Ripley's and Kim Kardashian have denied that it was damaged. I think some photos online say otherwise, but what do I know? This is the exact sort of thing that I would expect an institution like Ripley's to take part in, though. I see Ripley's as a museum in kind of the loosest definition of the word, but that's a conversation for another time. Wearing a textile that is old and fragile is one thing, but if your aim is to preserve it indefinitely, you definitely should not be allowing people to wear it. But what about playing a musical instrument? Should people be allowed to play instruments that are also artifacts? Now, this is where the conversation gets interesting, because people actually do this all the time. Instruments are meant to be played, and many of them, especially the well-made ones, will actually begin to deteriorate if they're not played often. You see this a lot with pianos. Lizzo recently played a crystal flute on stage at one of her concerts that belonged to a former American president. The crystal flute, which is housed at the Library of Congress, was brought out to Lizzo on stage by a librarian of Congress, and she played it for a few moments before handing it back to said librarian. On one hand, Lizzo is a classically trained flutist, but on the other hand, I'm not so sure that flutes need to be played regularly in the same way that pianos do to maintain their integrity. Musicians, yell at me in the comments if I'm wrong. Again, my blanket statement is that I don't think rich people should just be allowed to check out artifacts from museums like library books, but I'm more willing to forgive Lizzo for borrowing the flute than I am to forgive Kim Kardashian for wearing the dress. And the main reason for that is that not only was the flute undamaged, but it was also in the hands of a professional the entire time it was on stage. I also want to be clear that my issue isn't with old things being used. I love it when grandfather clocks are regularly wound and antique pianos are played to maintain their integrity. I just have reservations with letting the rich and famous have their way with museum collections, especially when it can potentially damage the artifact and take that away from future generations who would not be able to see it otherwise. What do you think, though? Do you think Kim was more in the wrong than Lizzo? Do you think that Lizzo really shouldn't have played that flute? Do you think that Marilyn Monroe's dress doesn't really matter? I would love to know everybody's opinions on this. This is kind of all I have to say about this. I wanted this to be a really short and sweet video. I feel like I could go into more detail with a lot of this, but I don't really see the point, because I'm sure in another couple months there will be another instance similar to this dress and this flute being borrowed from a museum collection by someone rich or famous. But that is just my 2 cents as a museum person looking at these objects and these controversies that keep coming out. If you enjoyed this video and want to check out some of my other museum content, please check out my channel, hit subscribe. I will have another video coming out in the next 2 weeks or so, so if you want to see that, make sure that you've got notifications turned on. Have a lovely day/afternoon, and I will see you next time.